Hi everyone, my name is Rebecca Tan, and I'm the editor-in-chief of Asian Scientist magazine. We are an award-winning print and online magazine based in Singapore, but covering science and technology right across Asia. It is my pleasure today to welcome you to the final Wild-Type Media Expert Opinion webinar of the season. We've had a really great run so far with the past 8 sessions, and today we're ending with a bang. Our guest is a Nobel Laureate and the Vice Chancellor of one of the top universities in the world, the Australian National University. His name is Professor Brian Schmidt. Professor Brian Schmidt is an accomplished astrophysicist, having won the Nobel Prize in 2011 for his research on supernova that showed that the universe is actually expanding. Back on Earth, he serves as the Vice Chancellor of ANU, one of the top universities in Australia and indeed the world. Welcome, Brian. It's an honor to have you here today.
Great to be with you, Rebecca.
Thank you so much. So, Brian, I know that 2020 has been a really challenging year for ANU, beginning with the bushfires in January and now also COVID-19. Can you tell us what the situation on campus is like right now?
So we're in what we call a second stage, a stage B, where we're allowing some students back onto campus, those that have research projects, and where staff are allowed to come back, but we're working partially from home, partially at work. So it's sort of in a mixed mode, and our hope is that next semester for classes, which starts in the end of July, we'll be able to welcome most of our students back. We do know that many of our students, including those in Singapore, the borders aren't yet open. And so we're trying to figure out ways around that. But at this point, we're going to be teaching in a hybrid mode. So life is slowly getting back to normal. We haven't had any community transmission of COVID-19 throughout the pandemic. We've had maybe one case that they weren't sure exactly where it came from. Everything else has been traceable to overseas or interstate. So it's been quite safe here. But of course, we've all had to adapt to working from home. And so in a period of 1 week, I went from having a campus vibrant with life to all of us suddenly being working from the confines of our house. I'm in my living room here tonight, and I still work 1 day a week at home just to make sure that we remind ourselves that others are continuing to work from home for a variety of reasons. And we keep on top of what it is like to work from home, because as people who have been doing it, it's easy to get left behind if everyone's back in the office. So it's been an interesting time, that's for sure. And you forgot one other thing, which is in addition to the smoke, we had a supercell thunderstorm that did hundreds of millions of dollars worth of damage due to hail on our campus as well. And that was on the 20th of January. So January was a very tough month.
I'm so sorry to hear that. I just hope that the following year will be better. So right now, I would like to find out a bit more about our audience that is here with us today. We have over 330 people right now. So I'm launching a poll to find out from you, where do you come from? Are you in industry, from biotech or pharma? Are you in academia, whether you're a student or postdoc? Or are you from the media or government or somewhere else? It's just so that we can find out more about you and maybe tailor our discussion today to more something you might like to hear, more close to what you might be interested in. And I'll just stop the poll right about now and I'll share the results with you. So as you can see, the bulk of you are lecturers or faculty members. We also have quite a large number of students here with us today. This is understandable given the topic, and a lot of people as well that categorize themselves as none of the above. So that's our crowd here today. Um, right, so now let's just go back over to you, Brian. Could you tell us how ANU and other Australian universities have been impacted by COVID-19? Which is the change that you are most concerned about?
Well, I mean, I think the immediate challenge that we had was just catering to our students. So our semester here starts at ANU in the middle of February, and we have a large number of international students, and many of them were stranded at home because they were unable to get to Australia. So being able to go through and keep them connected to their studies here in Australia while they're, of course, being disrupted by the COVID-19 pandemic around them. That was a huge challenge. And it required my staff to really go through and do things with almost no notice. That was, that was as good as it could be for the students. So that was the first thing. The other thing is when we left campus, of course, we had huge amounts of research experiments that had to be stopped or suspended. And so that's very challenging for a research intensive university like we are, in that, you can't just do your chemistry at home. And so that really did strand a lot of people and make it impossible for them to do their experiments. And for our young researchers, this is a critical part of their research career, and it's essentially a broken piece of their career that is, they're kind of left stranded without too much to do. So trying to make sure that those people are able to do additional training or other activities so we can keep their careers in motion, that's also very important. And it's been really, really challenging. So fortunately, we have those people back on campus. But I do think those early career researchers and our students have been the real challenge. But there's also little things. For example, suddenly having people have to start working from home and their children no longer in daycare, for example, and they're trying to do work and be parents simultaneously. So we've really been focusing on providing support and not having unreasonable expectations of people having to be two things at once.
As a mother myself, that's really heartening to hear. So how have the students and faculty responded to online learning? What have you found that are aspects of learning that cannot be replicated online?
So I think at some level, the response has been remarkable given, the constraints. But the reality is that the online learning, well, is as good as we can do under the circumstance. Different people have been able to adjust to it in different ways. Now, I've always been a fairly innovative educator, and I don't get to teach too much as Vice Chancellor, but I've always had some, for the last several years, digital components to learning. And so I think that people who had done a fair bit of experimentation were able to move into the mode pretty quickly. And then you can use tools like Zoom, which are, quite frankly, remarkable how well they work. You can use those to do some face-to-face things that, well, not quite as good as in person. It's not bad if you have pretty small classes. And look at today, we have 389 people here doing something that is just absolutely not possible. Well, it was possible last year, but we would have never done it. You would have instead flown me up there. We would have done this. I would have said, sorry, I'm too busy. So it does open up some other opportunities. But we've gone through and polled our students and we've said, how's this working for you? And most of them say, it kind of sucks, but we're coping. But the thing that they miss the most is the in-person interaction that ANU specializes. We're not a mass production mega university, and a lot of universities in Australia are. We're not. So I expect in most of our classes for people to have a chance to talk in small groups about what's going on. And Zoom has some features that allow that, but it's a little different, and some people aren't comfortable in the space. Other people are very comfortable. So I think that that one-on-one interaction, being able to go and ask questions afterwards, that clearly is missing. And I think it's really helped delineate what is good on digital and what isn't so good on digital. So it gives us a way to, I think, ultimately improve our teaching in the future.
Yes, so on that note, what are some things that actually are good on video and we should do more of?
So one of the things is it provides flexibility. And real-time feedback like this, well, why not allow it so that if people are off doing something else or, have children or carers leave or something, and we do have a number of mature age students who are in that situation, let's be a little bit more flexible to allow them in. I think the other thing is that we know that lectures, the way that have been being done since 1080 in Bologna, the beginning of the university, don't work very well with young people. Now, I think they work better in Singapore because you guys are better behaved as young people than our Australian students are. But I think even in Singapore, when we go through and we say, all right, a student has just watched a professor do a 1-hour lecture, how much of that lecture did they remember? And the answer is almost nothing.
Mm.
So we need to think about how we convey information. And so one of the reasons I had moved to digital delivery is that you can go through and you can do short little chops, and we know people's attention spans about 5 minutes or so. And you can go through, give them a little bit, quiz them on it. They can go back and keep learning and looking at the stuff they didn't understand again and again and again, look at other resources, and do that just exposition of a lecture. Don't do that in real time most of the time. Have people do it before they come to class. So for the classroom, so the non-digital experience, then you can have the really stand-up, charismatic lecture that's really motivating. Not too many of those, but a few of those are good. But then I think it's a high level of interactivity, being able to have conversations, having people ask questions, and then being able to respond to them. That's the stuff you want to be able to do in person. So I really think that the digital stuff is for asynchronous communication, and it should replace the lecture, but also a lot of the textbook. I mean, the textbook will still be there, but it fits into that off, non-real time aspect.
Right. So what I'm hearing is that nothing really can replace the face-to-face interactions, but the strength of online methods is that it's asynchronous. It lets people be flexible with their time.
Yeah, and the other thing that digital provides is the fact we're having a conversation now. So I'm going to be doing a course that's called Physicists for Leaders, and it's kind of an innovative little course. And I'm going through and saying, well, I reckon Stephen Chu, who of course was a Nobel Prize winner and Secretary of the Department of Energy and a friend of mine. Now, normally I could never have him address my class, but why not? Why not do what we're doing right now and have him be part of my class? Well, I'm going to try to do that. So you can suddenly insert people on the other side of the planet into your class in a way you just couldn't do before. So I think there's some real opportunities to really raise our game up a notch.
Right. But given that online content can now be made so much more accessible once it has been produced, what is stopping the universities from making all their courses freely available as a public good?
Money would be my first guess, but I and Paul Francis have done a very large, massively online open course several years ago now. So just before I became Vice Chancellor, so almost 5 years ago. So there is 2 years of undergraduate astronomy, and it's done. We've done a good job. Paul gets a huge amount of the credit, and it's essentially the first 2 years of an undergraduate degree in astronomy, noting that you have to do the physics and math and all the other stuff normally in a degree, and it's free. And getting up to 1 million people have done that course, and it's great. Is it as good as taking the class from me at ANU? No, nowhere near as good, but it's still good. And so I do think we need to go out and give everyone of the world a chance to learn, and there's all sorts of great resources for people. But then we have the opportunity to make things better, and the value add that a university does is to make things better. I mean, I will say doing that 2-year, so it was 36 lectures, was an enormous amount of work. I mean, it was a year's worth of work. So one of the reasons we don't do it is it's expensive and it's time consuming, and it's great 1 million people have been able to do it. I'm glad I've done it, but I'm not going to be doing it again anytime soon because it's just so much work.
Right. So what I'm hearing is money is a big issue when it comes to providing education for the masses. So turning the question over now to our audience, I'm going to launch our second poll. This poll is about what do you think the primary purpose of a degree is? I say primary because of course it could be any of these things, but what do you think is the main reason people should get a degree or should spend lots of money, hundreds and thousands of dollars sometimes, to get a degree? What do you think is the purpose? And we've got over 400 people in the room right now, 412 actually. And what do the 400 of you think is going on? What is the purpose of getting a degree? Okay, so the majority of the respondents, 40% of you, feel that the main reason to get a degree is to get a good job. The next most popular answer was to pursue knowledge, followed by learning how to think, 22%, and lastly, self-discovery, 12%. I'm sure maybe some of you have others which were not mentioned. You can ask that in the Q&A as well. So I'll just stop sharing the results with you. So, Brian, do you have any thoughts on what people think a university degree is for? How would you like to respond to that?
Well, I think, Rebecca, as you said, it's a little bit, it depends on who you are and what part of life and what degree you're doing. And so it can be any of those things. Ultimately, it also depends on the university.
Yes.
If you think about ANU, we're really an educational university, and we're not a training university. So education is the underpinnings that hopefully last you a lifetime, and training are the specific skills. And I think it used to be, you know, you did a block of education and then you tacked on at the end maybe some training, and you only had to do that once in your life. In 2020, I think we have to rethink that.
Yes.
I think the amount of education most people need is more than you might imagine. And you're probably going to have to be trained several times. And the more education you have, the more things you can be trained for. So there's an interesting balance there. So it depends on, as I said, exactly who and what people, you know, what stage of people's lives they're in. And it's not that one is better than the other. Hopefully education is a little bit of self-discovery, understanding how to think. And it would be sad to me if people got no joy out of education. But the reality is most of us get educated so we can get fulfilling and interesting jobs. And one way or another, that feeds into the four things that you had there.
Okay, and that leads me to our next question, which is, should students be treated as customers and should a degree be treated as a product? Do you see any conflict between the need to revamp the business model of a university and your mission as education?
So I think it really, again, depends on the degree in the university.
Right.
I would love for everyone in the world to get a degree of the quality that we offer here at ANU, or for example, that NUS or NTU, some of the other great institutions, SMU, et cetera, in Singapore offer. But it's really expensive. And I also think it's reasonable to say that not everyone needs that level of education. Not everyone benefits, not everyone's interested. And so it's not a one size fits all. So within my university, I like to think of students as part of the community. And I hate calling them customers, but we do need to serve them and serve them well. And you can use that notion of customers. I mean, they have every right to expect and want to be treated well and to get a great education. Is a diploma a product? Again, it sort of is a product, but it's also something that they earn. And a lot of what a diploma is what the student makes of it. So I always tell students, well, you know, you will be very focused on that degree, but actually what you learn along the way, that's actually the really valuable thing. And straight when you finish your degree, the actual diploma is worth a lot to you, but the longer and longer you live past that time, it is the more what you have learned and what you're able to do that matters, as opposed to the actual degree itself. So it is, I think there's also, you know, mass education is a necessity. And if I'm in that stage of my career where I really need to learn how to use Azure, for example, a platform of Microsoft, I'd really like to have a relatively inexpensive, easy to learn, no frills training module that I can pop through. I get my certification. I learn enough to do my job and I move on. And there's nothing wrong with that. And at that case, the student is a customer,
Mm,
and the diploma really is a product. But nothing wrong with that. It's just different than what I do.
right. Okay, that makes sense. Um, Now, this is a question from me. What will universities look like when my son, who just turned 4 yesterday, reach university age? What do you think?
I think a lot of universities 14 years from now are going to look very similar to what they do now.
Hmm.
Uh, they will have adapted. Your son will be able to learn faster and more than my son, who's just finishing up university, did now, because the digital augmentation just allows people to learn faster and easier than we have now. But a lot of the universities that are in this mixed place where they're kind of operating as a company, but pretending to be a university.
Yep.
There's a lot of universities around the world like that. I think they're going to be in trouble. And the reason they're going to be in trouble is that other universities or companies are going to be able to come out and disintermediate their business model and do better, cheaper. And so when I talk about getting that certificate to learn Azure or some skill in something, it's not clear that universities should be doing that. And so maybe we need fewer universities. I still think we need universities, but do we need 70% of the world to have a university degree?
Mm.
Or do we need to have 20% of the world doing university degrees, doing certain types of activities, and a whole range of other education providers that are, more efficient and cheaper and don't have all the extra research and all that other stuff layered on top, which may not be appropriate for people. So I think your son will go into a world that does have universities, but a whole range of new types of institutions, probably commercial, that provide very high quality products and keep the universities, quite frankly, honest, having to do something different.
Right, and this is a related question. It was submitted by one of the audience members beforehand. The question is, do you think that formal schooling will be overshadowed by a more open or distance learning informal mode of schooling in the future?
I think formal schooling will be important. And the reason is that we underplay the importance of relationships. And as good as the screen and Zoom is, it's a little different than being able to sit down and have a chat, get to know people, and really learn trust. And especially if there's more than a few people in a conversation, one-on-one, the digital works pretty well. Especially if I've met you before, and so I sort of know what you're like, and I can, trust you. But I think more complex interactions that involve 5, 6, 7 people just thinking through things, trying to learn how to study together, those are challenging digitally. And there's a camaraderie and a human side to learning where you trust someone, you can ask stupid questions, they'll teach you, they'll learn. All those things I don't think are going to go away. And I think those are part of the learning process. So my sense is it's not going to just be that side's not going to go away. People are going to still have that formal learning together.
Right. Thanks for that, Brian. Right now, I'm just going to get one of the guests to ask their question live. So, Cami Navarro, I'm just going to give you permission to speak. Please give us your name and your affiliation and ask your question. All right, Cami? Okay, Cami, you have been unmuted. Go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, Brian. So I was a former alumnus of ANU, actually, so just wanted to say hi. But my question is, so for international students that attend ANU, what about those from low resource settings? How can we make online learning, especially in this time, more accessible to them? Because from the Philippines, our internet, for example, is not very stable. So do you have any ideas on that? Thank you.
So it's a real challenge. And so we do have students from, over 100 countries. Some have terrible internet and some have very good internet, but it's been a bit of a nightmare. So we have gone through knowing some of our students cannot get to ANU, cannot get to Australia. And so we provided funds up to $5,000 per student to be able to go out and purchase equipment, hopefully find their way to a library or someplace that they can get internet connectivity. But there's limits of what we can do. And if the foundations of the internet infrastructure aren't in place in the country, what we can do, the best we can do is to tell them, we'll do everything we can for you, but you may need to just back off and take a little bit of time off during this COVID-19 crisis. And so we've been very, very flexible. We've allowed people to stay enrolled, but not pay fees until the very end. We also recognize it's a crazy year, so we're allowing people to sit exams, and then they can decide if they want to go pass, fail, or keep their grade and things like that, because we know it's an environment that is quite discriminatory compared to people's backgrounds. Moreover, I think there's a bigger question is, how do I get more people from the Philippines to come to ANU? And so for that means we've been, out trying to raise money from our alumni to go through and provide funds so that we can offer scholarships, because ANU is richer, having people from all over the world, and that really enhances what the education is at ANU. And so I'm very keen to have as many students as we can have from a variety of countries and backgrounds, and not just have those who can pay be the ones who come.
Right, Cami, I hope that answers your question. Okay, and I'll just take another question right now. This is from James Kahilik. James, if you can hear me, I'm just going to allow you to talk for the moment. James, could you introduce yourself and ask your question? Go ahead. James, are you there? Okay, it seems like James is not there. All right, in that case, Xia Xin Wei, would you like to ask your question next? I'm giving you permission to speak. Can you hear me? Hello, Xia Xin Wei? Hi.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
so introduce yourself and ask your question, please.
I am Xin Wei, and I am a science assistant at a special school. I would like to ask you a question. While it's possible to teach scientific theory online, like your astrophysics classes on EDX, is it possible to give students a meaningful lab or practical experience on an online basis?
Right, so Xin Wei's question is about lab, or even we've had questions in the past about medical students and doing their rotations. How can we do those practical aspects in a time of a pandemic?
So what we've been doing is experimenting in a number of ways. One of the things that we have in the medical work, and indeed my Dean of Medicine was in Singapore, is doing simulation and being able to simulate a lot of things. And that is good for a variety of reasons. One, when students only learn by doing on actual patients, it's very hard to simulate, or it's very hard to find really rare things or make things hard without patients dying, etc. So simulation is a really important aspect. And so within medicine, that's been a really good development. And we can do that a bit with our labs in chemistry, physics, etc. In physics, what we have done is we've actually created labs that we've sent home to everyone. So people have got to go out and, okay, it's a little primitive compared to what they used to, but the lab is learning the techniques of measurement and error propagation and all these things. And it turns out we've been able to create quite interesting take-it-home labs. Part of me thinks that science spends a great deal of time having students do things like pipetting and, quite frankly, doing things that you would expect to automate through, robotization. And so when I see my poor students in biochem and biomedical going tunk, 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 and you're like, how many mistakes get made? Because it's very repetitive.
Yes.
Why don't we have a little machine that you can program and does all that stuff for you? You have a recipe. And when you publish a paper, you actually do the method as the robotic commands. Well, that type of robotic command, of course, can be done as part of a lab remotely. So I think there are many, many opportunities. Part of what we do, of course, is we spend the money on just letting people keep on doing things the old-fashioned way, rather than investing in the new updated techniques and equipment, because it's expensive. But that's where we're going to go in the end. And so I would expect in the future, there's no way you're going to have people mixing chemicals together. That's dangerous. People blow things up, they die, bad things happen. So just have it entirely done by robots. That's where I think we're going to go. And then, of course, you just do that as part of the lab. And people might say, well, that's boring. Well, yeah, I actually think science is about trying to learn and understand what's going on. The actual, like that, I cook, I make sourdough, I do all sorts of stuff if I want to do chemistry at home.
Yes. All right. Right now, I'll take another question from Professor S. Tiwari. Can you hear me, Professor S. Tiwari? Can you hear me? If you'd like to ask your question, please introduce yourself and ask your question. Go ahead. You've been unmuted.
Oops.
Sorry, I'm having trouble. Just 1 second. Okay. Whoa. Okay, you should be unmuted now.
Oh, yes, I did unmute. Okay, fine. Can you hear me, please?
Yes.
We can hear you.
Okay. Very good afternoon, and we are very much honored to have you here. In fact, we are so much thankful to Rebecca. My question is very straight, sir. When you said at the outset that there should be a kind of a hybrid teaching, so sir, what do you exactly mean by the hybrid teaching in this context, whatever is happening now? What exactly do you mean by hybrid teaching? Of course, it is both, but how do you see that, sir?
Yeah, so hybrid teaching is what we do when we have students overseas and we have students on campus. So we're calling that hybrid teaching. So what does that mean to me? Well, I teach cosmology, or at least I used to. So I talked about the nature of a flipped class. That's where I have digital delivery and I replace my lectures with an ability for students to go through, listen to a lecture in small little chunks and do quizzes and things along the line. That's what our edX MOOC is. So everyone can do that no matter where. And now my cosmology class typically has between 20 and 30 people. And so then when I go into class, I will have people in the classroom, but I will also have a group of people who are here on the screen, up behind me, and we will do the highly interactive questions where I start asking students questions to see how well they understand things, push them, their problem solving. Often I have them work on teams, and I can do that with people on screen, and I can do that with people in the room, and I can even have them interact with each other. That's a hybrid teaching. And it's hybrid because I've got people remotely and in person using that flipped class technique. So that's one way to do it, for example.
Okay. So I'm just gonna ask another question now, which was submitted beforehand. So, how ready are universities to adapt and transform? Your university, maybe on a scale of 1 to 10, and globally universities.
Transform, just transform generically?
Well, that was the question. Adapt and transform. You can define it as you wish.
We're a lot more ready than we were in January, and we tried to transform out of necessity, right? And the university, my university, your universities, universities around the world have transformed and transformed much more quickly than they would have done given anything else. So I actually think COVID-19 has sped up this digital transformation quite a lot. Universities are by definition slow-moving institutions. They are meant to be amongst the slowest moving institutions in society. They're uncorruptible by the politics of the day, or they should be, by short-term thinking, by chasing money. It's meant to be the pursuit of knowledge. And people are given tenure so that they can do that for 30 years of their career. And they're given tenure so that they can say things that are controversial, that are not widely accepted, and so they can keep pursuing that. But that also means those people don't like to change. Why should I change? I've got my job forever. I like the way my life was. 95% of people, in my experience, like their life the way it is, and they don't want to change. So in that sense, universities aren't able to transform like a company is, right? Companies transform all the time. And for me, running a university, one of the big challenges are, and I see this because I do a lot of work in Singapore, is governments and society want universities to change like that, to act like companies. But at the same time, they require them to do this really long-term thinking and not be subject to that short-term pulse. And the two are not reconcilable. If you want to make a university suddenly do something new by decree, then it's actually not a university. It's something else. It's a research agency. So that's sort of the difference between, in Singapore, I guess I see the difference between A-STAR, which is a mission and the government can tell it what to do, and a university, which has got more freedom than you might think. So a big long-winded answer, but I think that, yeah, universities shouldn't transform quickly, but they have been able to transform quickly out of necessity of their own free will.
Right. And what would you say to people who say that the professorship scheme is actually a Ponzi scheme? It benefits those that get tenure, but not everyone else.
Well, I'm not sure if I'd call it a Ponzi scheme, because a Ponzi scheme would mean we'd have ever more and more professors, and we don't. Singapore, which had a lot of growth of universities, has now reached peak population, and I've seen your demographics there because that's some of the work I do for Singapore. And so your universities, for the first time in their recent lives, are having to look at becoming a little smaller over time, and that's hard. The Ponzi scheme comes from potentially PhD students. And so we train PhD students, and I don't do this, but many people do, under the lie that you too will become a professor, when we know that probably only 1 in 10 PhD students can become a professor. Now, my view is that I don't mind 1 in 10 PhD students becoming a professor, as long as all PhD students know what the deal is when they start. And the reality is that people with PhDs have a lot of options in life. Doing a PhD for many people is really interesting. And I always tell people that if you hate doing your PhD, it's not worth it. Do something else. But if you love it, then it's not a bad thing to do. And it gives you lots of options in life to do things well beyond being a professor. And I think in Singapore, people with PhDs are quite valuable in industry. And that's one of the problems we have in Australia, is our PhDs are highly valued overseas. But interestingly enough, Australian industry isn't sure about PhDs. So it's quite a challenge here.
Do you have any idea why that is the case, why they are not valued as highly?
Australia hasn't had a lot of research intensive firms. We have some. So, you know, if you're at Cochlear or Atlassian or CSL, which are big research intensive firms, they love PhDs. But, you know, if you're at another firm, Rio Tinto, which is a big mining company, we need a couple of those people, but why do I want, You know, that's not our job. I actually, Rio Tinto is a bad example. They like PhDs. They do a lot of research at Rio Tinto. But, you know, most of Australia does high value add services, but they don't think of PhDs as being what they want to develop their product. They'd rather have people who are less trained.
Right. I'm just gonna let Nish Suryan ask a question now. Nish, I'm just going to give you some permission to speak. Okay, so you've been allowed to speak. Would you like to introduce yourself and ask your question?
Hi, Professor. It's great to meet you. I'm Nesh. I'm an entrepreneur in residence here at a venture capital fund in Singapore. And particularly in EdTech innovation, I guess one of the big barriers here is the signaling value that the university brand has had for many generations. Does this signal and barrier to entry continue to benefit societal progress in the future, in your view? And how do you see that evolving?
Yeah, so the signaling is, I mean, we can call it branding, if you want to think of it. And so we're obviously fiercely protective of our brands. You know, QS rankings just came out, and that's very important to us. And so that is a way to extract rent from the market. But I guess in the end, you will lose that signaling brand unless you provide something that is distinctly unique. So this is where I talked earlier about, I think a lot of mediocre universities are going to have their business model disintermediated by firms. And COVID-19 is going to speed that up because people realize what you can do. And if you're getting something that is, you know, in the COVID-19 world, it hasn't decreased in quality, then I'm not convinced that a university is the right place for that type of education to occur. And so I'm fairly controversial on this because I actually think that, you know, probably 20% of a country should have a university education. And I do think that there is a lot of lifelong learning that is probably better done by ed tech providers, but I think there's a lot of mass education as well. I mean, everyone in Australia and Singapore is going to have education that goes beyond year 12 in the future. It's literally everyone. And I think ed tech will have a big part to play in that. And I think university has its niche, but in the end, if you rely solely on the signaling, you'll eventually be undone. So you better use that signaling to deliver something distinctive and of value.
Right, okay, and we probably have time for just one last question. And this question is, given that the world will profoundly change and education will profoundly change after COVID-19, what is your hope for a better higher education system in a post-COVID world?
So I can give a long-winded, I think the big opportunity is for the university system and people within universities to use digital to augment how they teach. And that will allow us to teach better, more people, more efficiently. So that's one of the big positives. The other thing is it's going to allow us, hopefully, to collaborate better. As I said, I've had Zoom for the last several years. I was an early adopter of Zoom, and so been using it since within a few weeks of it being released, actually. And so I've been willing to use Zoom, but other people haven't because it's just a foreign technology. No, Brian, fly over to New York, fly over to Singapore, fly to London. And, you know, I did 300,000 miles worth of airline travel last year. And I'm really looking forward to doing a lot less airline travel next year. So I think it allow us to actually work better collaboratively across nations, because we'll do it all the time. Rather than waiting to have a once-a-year conversation with a collaborator, I'm going to be able to do it in real time all the time. And we'll have conferences, working groups, and I think that's a huge opportunity as well. So those are the things that I think we can really look forward to coming out of COVID-19. But I think the danger is a breakdown of how we work across the world. The world order is on pretty shaky ground, and that's due to some very complex political interactions around the world, including, I would say, a very fragile situation in many of the world's leading democracies, where polarization has crept in and people are unhappy and there's disruption. So I'm on the upside, we're going to be able to work collaboratively together if we're allowed to work collaboratively. And I just think there's a big risk that the world could be shut down and we could end up with a new Cold War or worse in the post-COVID-19 world as well.
Right. Hopefully that will not happen and the world order will hold, but we don't know what will happen. And with that, I think we've just run out of time. Thank you all so much for joining us. It's been an amazing experience running these webinars with world-class speakers like Brian, and all of you are really active and engaged audience. If you like what you see here, do follow us on our social media channels so that you will be the first person to know what the next iteration of Wild Type Media Expert Opinion will be. I'd just like to, at this point, to give a shout out to my team who has made all of this happen, and you guys are really amazing. But last but not least, thank you so much, Brian, for taking the time today to speak to us and sharing your really valuable insights. I'm sure everyone will leave today's session with much food for thought and hopefully hope for the future and the role that education can play in shaping it. So thank you, everyone. Signing off from Singapore. Take care, wash your hands, and wear a mask. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Look forward to visiting you again.
Yes, thanks so much, Brian. Thanks. Bye, everyone.